Good morning, and good morning, Katie. Good morning to everybody listening in. My name is Joanne. I am your host for today, and I'm joined by Katie McGreal, fellow Relaxed Kids coach. Although she absolutely takes it to a whole other level by doing a lot of her work Osceola. So, Judith, Katie, my Irish is very limited, I have to embarrassingly admit. However, we are going to be chatting this morning all things, I guess, ancient history, cycles, rhythms, women, menstrual health, and I guess how that can be significant and important for us as modern day women, or how I guess Katie and I are going to share some of our journey with that work. So thank you to everybody that's joining. If you are watching in and you think anybody might benefit or might like to listen to the chat, please feel free to hit the share button and also to pop any of your comments into the questions. We would be delighted to explore them with you. And I guess that's kind of going to be the thing here is that there won't be particularly hard and fast answers, because this is a process of exploration rather than a one size fits all kind of thing. So Katie, over to you. Tell me a little bit about you, what you do, what you're passionate about, and let's introduce yourself to our audience this morning.
As Joanne just said, I'm a Relaxed Kids coach. I also teach mindfulness to adults, and I am based in Galway now, but I had been in Belfast for almost 7 years. And then I've been in Galway for almost a year, but it's probably been a year and a half when I decided it was time to leave Belfast. And I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that I was going somewhere. So I've always described the move to Galway as kind of a soul move. I didn't know why I wanted to go. I didn't have any concrete, solid reasons, because I'm a Relaxed Kids coach and I was teaching in a few different schools, and I didn't really have anything in Galway, but I always knew that I loved the west of Ireland. My dad is from Mayo. We spent an awful lot of time here as when I was a child, and I love the sea. And also I'm right beside one of the biggest Gaeltachts in the country, so that would have been one of the draws as well. I love Irish and I love mindfulness and relaxation and Relaxed Kids and all of that. And I think it was October was when I first started teaching in some of the schools out there. And I remember going into my first class and I was really nervous because I was doing it in a new language and a different dialect in that new language. And it was also just a new group, which is always kind of nerve-wracking, but it was so lovely doing it. And I knew as soon as I had even done the first class, I was like, oh, this was definitely the right thing to do. It was just so nice to see their faces light up and how much they enjoyed it. And it was great to be able to go in and do it in their language as well.
Absolutely. And I think, I love that description that you use is the soul journey. And, very often we all, and there's been lots of conversation over the last number of years, and both of us are obviously part of that conversation as well, around mental health and mental well-being. And another, I guess, element of our well-being is dropping into our soul, kind of coming out of our head and dropping into that. And, there was no logical plan. There wasn't. And I know I was part of, I was in touch with you around that time. And absolutely, I can 100% say this was a journey of trust. And a journey of let's see where this goes, which can be quite frightening at times. I mean, if we go into the head and try and figure it, and yet when we drop out, there's almost an inner knowing that goes, no, I actually don't have a choice in whether I do or don't do this. This is happening and I just need to flow with it, and I can resist it. It's going to happen anyway.
Yeah, because I knew that if I stayed where I was, it wasn't feeling right. And I knew I would eventually probably quite resent the place that I stayed, even though I would have chosen to stay there myself. But it was definitely it was scary, but not necessarily when I was actually doing it, because I had so much happening. I moved from the house I lived in Belfast to Dublin for a month. But in the month I was in Dublin, I probably was at home for maybe a week in total, but not all together at the same time. So I had so many different things going on, and then I actually had to move to Galway, and it was actually the sitting with not actually having any work yet that was really scary. Jenny Granger says it's sitting in the unknown, and I found that
Katie, I'm not sure if you can pick me up there. I'm just losing your sound a little bit. So you might want to pop your earphones perhaps out of your device there, maybe just for a moment.
Is that, hang on, I can turn down my sound here then. Is that any better? Can you hear that any better?
Sorry, just bear with us for a moment. I'm not sure if anybody watching in can catch the sound there, or if Cathal can maybe give me a little bit of an indication as to whether the sound is going through, because I'm not able to hear anything at the moment.
Are you not hearing anything at all?
I can hear you okay. I can hear you okay, Katie.
Okay.
Joanne, the problem is your end.
Okay, perfect. No, I've totally
We'll switch to the video, Joanne, and you try and fix your sound.
Perfect. Thanks, Cathal.
Ik shol mask na spirit Avian shokjo lawa shinshe morosa
Cuinemuid an focal caileach go minic ag an náam seo don bblion.
Which?
Agus tíammuid na hiúine don sean bhean grana. Ach ní sin mar atá sé. Támuid a lig mar chud den nadar. Is mailim a foiniuh a wahí hart orm, agus is tí anam.
Deirhin do mar a go mé bio céad blian ó hin gnéarthach daoine gur caileach mé. Bíon an éifeacht ag an nealach ar an tíide, agus bíon ar daoine freisin. Má hí am hain sin? Gach mí bí meid fannacht ar an nealach lán le ní a cealara. Rinn na mná a neací Róm sin ar fanna cíanta.
Tá cuachtán ar a hagan rála chéile. Tá nasc agin leis an ngealach. Bogan ar gurpna leis an ngealach agus lena chéile. Tá cuacht leis an iver trí. Agus tá cuacht nar hagan trúr rála chéile. Gach mí tagamid a chéile a gghearcail na man. Chun deascar a dhéanamh. Le scéalú le rudí nach bhfuil bhain heile. Agus chun rudí nua a ligean just seach.
Glantar an dhear le sáiste le fáil ré le foiniuh díoltach. Seo nó sa bhí ag daoine fud fad an dóin le fada.
Chun muid smaointí dearfacha tá muid géirí a cothú isteach san isce. Agus ólann muid an tuisce sin leis an fuinneamh dearfacha á álas deach in or gurpain.
Úsáidim muid cartaí chun cóile agus tacaíochta eil. Ó nádar déaga agus na spirid.
Scríomh muid ar páp ar na rudí gur bháilinn scaoile leo.
Cos leis an dóid a scialann na cruinn leis na duilleoga. Scialann muid féin le rudí nach bhfuil buinse linn níos mó.
Agus an sin dam muid iad le chéile Ar son muid hain agus ar son daoine eile atá ag stracailt leis na rudaí céine linne.
Bíonn muid glan arís agus réad an céad bhí eile. An rud is cuachtaí faoin jazzrá seo ná an grá. Na mná an nádúr agus an grá.
Nice, such a beautiful piece there, Katie.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to do as well.
I can imagine, and thankfully we're back on sound. The energy was a bit choppy and changey there for us, so and thankfully we got cut to the video to get that sorted out for us. So, and I guess we kind of perhaps threw people in a little bit at the deep end there because we didn't, you know, we kind of didn't do the lead into that. So you and I met obviously back when you did your Relaxed Kids training. And I think round about the same time, I was possibly maybe doing my Moon Mother training or in and around that. And we kind of got chatting about the Moon Mother work and feminine energy and realised that we had a sort of a mutual interest and connection with that and how it could benefit us as 21st century women. So, and then, you know, you kind of joined my Living in Flow circle, which was very much is based around journeying through our menstrual cycle, the Celtic calendar, the full moon, and those kind of things. What was it? I mean, and I know you were very new to all of that whenever that journey started. So can you tell somebody maybe who isn't into this work or has never heard of it, what was it that appealed to you, and you know, why get involved? And again, I guess this is going to somewhat touch on a soul journey, but let's see where we go with it.
I think originally it might have been a connection thing, that wanting to have a connection with other people, maybe, but also a connection with myself. I think it first came up in conversation when I had contacted you, or I was asking somebody about ways to help with menstrual pains, menstrual cramps and things, and I ended up meeting up with you, and you had mentioned about the Living in Flow circle, and I kind of just thought, why not? I wasn't hearing a definite no, and it was because I definitely learned an awful lot as being part of that group, and that would have been the beginning of my understanding of a lot. I remember when I was younger, I always really liked the moon. I was quite mesmerized by it. I quite liked the look of it, and if it was ever a full moon, it always looked really cool, but I never fully understand what the connection was. And it was, I think, just because I had been meditating quite a bit at that point, I was very aware of myself and how I was feeling. And when I was feeling certain things in my body, I wanted to understand it more. And I wanted to learn more about what was happening within me, because it's not something that I was ever taught very much about. Because in school, we were basically taught, here's a sanitary towel and tampons, you use them once a month. That was we weren't really taught huge amount about, well, I guess in secondary school then a little bit about what actually happens, but it was on paper and it wasn't really connected to us and what actually happens within us. So I think it was wanting to find out more about what's going on in my body, when I was very aware that I wasn't being told, or I hadn't been told, and I didn't fully know what was happening.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, because as women, we so often, and as young girls, we're told some of the physical stuff, and we're kind of told about it, I guess, really from our menstrual cycle's role in conception and in having babies and all of that. And there's a whole other wealth of stuff, the emotional side of it, the energetic side of it, the working with our cyclical nature and our cyclical energy that we really don't kind of understand at all, and are certainly given very, very little information about. What struck me there as you were talking was, you know, you mentioned that you wanted connection with other people, and, you know, very often one of the keys to for our health and well-being is finding our tribe and having a connection with like-minded people who can support our growth and development and change, kind of change where we're at, and also can help to nurture us and give us new skills and all of those things in a very safe space. And very much that's what women's circles, I guess, kind of lend themselves to. Now, and the other thing then is the connection to self, which I believe can't happen without a connection to nature. And you mentioned the moon.
Yeah, I went out for a walk this morning, and I was thinking that nature is one, if not the biggest teacher, definitely one of the biggest teachers I have had since starting the meditation, spiritual, self-awareness journey, whatever it is you want to call it. So we can't survive without it. I walk in some of the fields that are beside the estate I live in here, and every time I go into the fields, I kind of go out of my way to go down towards 2 big trees. And there's something about touching the trees and saying thank you, because without them, we don't survive. We can't live without nature. And I think that the state of the world at the minute is really showing us that. We seem to think that we are bigger and better and can outsmart nature, but actually nature and the planet has a different plan for us, because we can't. We have to survive with it. And noticing the cyclical nature of nature means that we can notice it more within ourselves and maybe be a bit more okay with not being able to run at 100% all of the time.
I think, absolutely, I've been so aware over this time, and I guess because for many of us, we're perhaps walking the same path or the same route, perhaps more than we've ever done. Maybe many of us might have a path that we walk regularly. However, there's definitely been an awareness. And every day, despite the fact that I'm walking the same path and the same route, I might be doing a few other walks as well throughout the day, but I do try to do at least one path, one route regularly, and maybe at least 5 times a week. And that path has changed and changes every single day. And particularly in spring, I mean, it's all about new growth. And we're getting, I'm observing the growth of the buds on the trees and all that comes with that. And one of the phrases that I've become very much aware of over the last few weeks is we are her guests and guardians and not her masters.
That's beautiful.
It's such a, and one of the things I love, and as I said at the beginning, I mean, I admit that my use of the Irish language is not very extensive. However, there are some beautiful words in Irish to describe those connections and those moments that don't actually have direct translation into English, and they're very much connected to our Celtic spirituality roots and that link with nature. And I think nature for me is such an incredible teacher, because if we look at the symbolism and the processes of nature, and if we as we said, there's that quote that comes around in autumn that talks about how nature is about to show us how beautiful it is to let things go. And one of the beauties for me of noticing the moon and perhaps being part of women's circles connected to the moon is that I then have an opportunity to take those cycles and integrate them into my world in connection often with my menstrual cycle, so that things don't get a chance to build perhaps in the same way that they used to when we're running on things all the time, and then we get to a phase where it's like everything's just too much and there's an explosion of emotion or energy or whatever. I find that by honouring and taking time each month to kind of connect to the cyclical energies, and to release at the new moon or at full moon, and to kind of set new intentions at new moon and to honour those, that has been hugely transformational for my overall well-being.
Yeah, and just to give yourself the space to do it. That's what I mostly found, because my first introduction to actually following or understanding the moon was definitely the Living in Flow group. And the fact that I was giving myself the time to do it was really was transformational, as you said. And it meant then that I became more aware of the moon and the effects of it. And then there was introducing myself where just feeling into the new moon without actually even realizing that was what I was doing. I noticed that there was a different part of it as well. But following that, it's it just makes life so much easier because you're not struggling with anything. You're, as it said, living in flow. You're going with the flow, and there's a stream in one of the fields that I walk through, and I was thinking about how it's just so much easier to lie there and flow down with it and just allow it to be. And when you were talking about how your path is changing, I was just saying to my housemate yesterday that I've been walking across the same fields. So I've been sick. So for 2.5 weeks, I wasn't walking. But before that, I was walking pretty much every day. And I was kind of a bit like, oh, it's going to get boring going across the same way and walking in the same path and that kind of thing. Not at all.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know who was thinking that, but it's not true.
Yeah. There's a quote that says, you never walk the same mountain twice.
Yeah.
And, you know, for me, that's exactly what nature, there is no two experiences in nature. If we allow ourselves to experience it, I mean, if we take it at face value and just go, I'm walking this path, then, you know, it is the same path as it was the day before. But if we take in and observe and notice the subtle differences, you know, how the clouds are, how the sky are, how the birds are singing, where the cows are in the field, where, you know, all of those things, and they can really bring us back to ourselves and help with that kind of grounded nature. And then I guess the video touched on using kind of oracle cards and that type of thing, that again for people can seem like very out there. And
fun.
You know, it's an interesting one because people, you know, it's kind of about trusting your intuition. What does that bring for you, or how does that benefit for you, or what does that help with, do you think?
Just makes things a bit easier. It gives you a few indications as to maybe what to do, or so I have tarot cards, and then I have goddess cards, and the goddess cards are obviously easier because they've got a picture of a goddess, and it gives you like things that you could do, or like tips as to a way to use whatever situation it is you're in, that kind of thing. The tarot cards, you've got to read them a bit more, and I don't know as much about them. But I was talking to a friend of mine. She said that her mum has them by the door, and her friends will come over and they'll be like, oh, whatever. And then my friend would go to the bathroom or go somewhere, and she comes back and her friends are going through them. And she's like, oh, you think it's crap, but you're actually going to take a look at it.
You're going to do it.
And she said, it just makes life so much easier. Like, what's different? You're just picking out a card, and what difference does it make?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's for me. I mean, you know, people often question placebo. And I personally don't have an issue with placebo at all. Because I kind of feel like if something makes us feel better, then that's okay. Because the aim surely is to feel better. It's not to understand why you feel better. It's to just feel better. And to kind of allow that journey. And I often say, and I'm sure you've heard me saying this, Katie, whereas, you know, people will say sometimes, but what if it's wrong? And I'm like, well, like, if it's not harming anybody else and it's not harming me, then it really doesn't actually matter. And the other part of that is that I kind of a long time ago sort of reconciled that if I get wherever we get, whenever this lifetime's all over, and someone says to me, you know, all that stuff that you believe down there and all that stuff about moons and cycles and menstrual cycles and nature and, you know, the sun and alignments and all that kind of stuff, or anything else, that's all nonsense. I'm actually okay with that. I don't mind, because it makes a difference to how I feel today, and it doesn't. And I was actually going to say there, it doesn't impact anybody else. It actually does. I'm hopeful in a healthy way, because the more I am okay with me, and the more balanced and connected and better I feel, then there is a positive ripple effect out to those around me, whether that's the person I meet in the shop who I can smile at instead of bark at, or whatever. If I'm kind of more grounded and connected to myself, then, you know, I'm cool with that.
Yeah, they say that about meditation and mindfulness as well. You only need one person in the house to practice it for it to affect everybody. And I'm very aware that I don't want to beat the mindfulness stick or force anything that I think or I believe on anybody else, but I really believe strongly in planting seeds. So if I mention something or somebody asks me about it, I will talk to them, but I don't know where it's going to go from there, and it's not my journey. I get to just talk about what I know from where I am. If somebody's interested in it, great. If they're not, great. Somebody said to me recently that, you know, I wouldn't say that meditation's a load of crap, but like other people might. And I said, that's okay. I don't own it. You can think what you want. I don't mind.
I'm not going to take it personal.
It's not mine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it can seem, you know, like we're going back in time, when, you know, I mean, I love this time of year. Baltain, Baltanya, there's, you know, different variations of how that's said, is one of my favourite times of year. And for the last few years, I've been blessed to celebrate that on the Hill of Ishnock, which has been an incredibly powerful ceremony. 3 years ago, Michael D. Higgins, the president, lit the fire there. And, you know, I think there is something hugely powerful about connecting to the wisdom of our ancestors and to the wisdom of our land and to knowing more about that. Now, I absolutely don't claim to know how to do it all right. And often people will say to me, oh, and how do you do this? And how do you do that? And I'm like, I don't really know. I kind of, you know, I'm learning, and it's a process of learning. It's not something that I would by any way kind of say I'm an expert in. I mean, there's amazing, incredible teachers out there. For anybody who's interested in some of the Celtic history stuff, Anthony Murphy, Mythical Ireland, does some absolutely phenomenal, and he's been sharing material. He's been sharing some of it over the last while, and his stuff is incredible. And you know, when we look, and just here, where, you know, where I'm based in South Armagh, I mean, our history is so. I cycled last week to one of the cairns, and you know, this is somewhere that I've lived for, like, you know, like ever, my whole life. And I had never really taken the time to visit. I drove past it, I knew it was there, and I never actually spent time in it. But, you know, this site is standing over 5,000 years. And I kind of think, you know, if it worked for so long, surely at a time when we are, and not just this period of time, but just in the 21st century in general, when we are so disconnected, we are so sick physically, mentally, emotionally, then surely that ancient wisdom can benefit us in some way.
Yeah, when I was out walking today, I having a little bit of imposter syndrome because I don't know how much I know about all of it either. So I actually looked up the different ones and was like, oh no, I've heard of them all. Like, I have some idea. But at the same time, for me, it's mostly about just going with the nature and going with the flow and being aware. So I to be honest, I didn't know very much about Bealtaine, but I am very aware that we're coming into summer and that the plants are all coming out and that the weather is getting warmer and it's, I mean, that was how they based and they set up the traditions. That's why they're traditions, because they just went with the flow of what was there already.
Absolutely.
So I saw a thing about putting wildflowers on your doorstep on the eve of Bealtaine, and I saw in one place it was for luck and somewhere else it was for the fairies, and I thought definitely for the fairies. So I went out and got gorse and I put them on the doorstep, and I forgot about it. Was going out for a walk then the next day, I think, and they'd been kind of blown off, and I thought, oh, fairies came by. And whether that's nuts or not, I don't really care. I had a bit of crack.
You had a bit of fun and you smiled, and and that is, you know, I guess that's totally for me what it's all about. But I think the human psyche loves ritual.
Yes.
It kind of needs, and we connect very well with it. And it's, you know, we've carried ritual through with Christianity and actually I guess the links between Christianity and Celtic spirituality in terms of significant dates and things like that are all very closely related as well. So we have carried ritual through, and the power of ritual into, through the history of humanity really has required ritual. And the simple act of sometimes simply pausing and noticing that, the moon is full tonight, and there's no moon tonight. And it's really interesting, because often when I talk to people about the moon, I say, like there's 2 or 3 nights of the month at least, even if it's a clear sky, that you won't, you'll probably not see a moon. And they're like, what? We kind of only notice it when it's there, and we forget about it when it's not.
I think that was why, because I would have always been more drawn to the full moon, but I feel like that's not unusual. That's what normally people do, because that's the one you see, and you're not so aware of the dark or the new moon because it's not there, so you can't see it. And for me, it wasn't until I got into the rhythm of the full moon that I became aware of the dark moon. And you can see that it gets bigger and smaller, so obviously it's going to disappear at some point. It makes sense, but if you don't see it, it's harder to notice.
It's harder to notice and to connect in with it. And I guess, to tie it into women's menstrual cycle and where the connection with the moon is there, again, for anybody that's listening in, and often women, when they stop having a physical bleed for whatever reason, and it may be at different stages, or it may be to do with medication or hormonal contraceptive or any of those kind of levels of things, then there's often a sense of kind of disconnect. There's cyclically still kind of changing, but there's not the physical there's not the physical bleed and the physical evidence there that they have a cycle. And often when I talk to women about their cycle, they only talk about the bleeding phase, because again, that's the bit.
It's the one you see.
That's the one you can see. And they, we're very disconnected from the other phases of that cycle. I mean, again, with exceptions, if somebody's on a fertility journey, they may be aware of, again, the physical ovulation and things like that. We tend not to be so aware of the energetic shifts and changes that happen with that. And so the moon can be a fabulous way to chart your cycle, because it allows us to have a cycle of sorts to kind of connect with and to recognize a beginning and an end point. And a calendar doesn't quite do that in the same way, because it's just a month. It's not really connected into our cyclical nature. And I always smile. There's a joke that goes around that says they discovered man's first calendar, and it was 28 marks on the wall. And someone someone on the other side goes, it probably was a woman's calendar, where she was marking out the moon and its changing cycles to kind of relate. Have you noticed physically the benefits of being aware, kind of more connected to nature, to the moon, to your cycles? Has that helped on a physical level?
Definitely, yes. Because before, I maybe would have been like antsy or would have gotten really upset and not understood it, and then like 2 days later I would start to bleed, and I'd be there going, okay, that makes sense. Whereas now I can get antsy or get annoyed and know that it's coming.
Absolutely.
But then sometimes I can feel a little bit of pressure as well, because I read, you recommended Lisa Lister's book, Code Red, which was brilliant, and it is brilliant, and would highly recommend it. But it talks about all of the different things that are going on basically in your body at the different points. But it was telling me that after your bleed, you're supposed to have loads of energy, or you should have loads of energy. And I'd be there going, but I don't. I should be feeling more energetic, but I'm not. But that was just another part of it, I guess, just leaning into, okay, maybe I'm not feeling energetic today. That could be for any 100 different reasons. And just going with that. Definitely, it was really just useful to know what was going on at what point, and also to notice the different so if something was happening one month, I can flick back. So I've got a notebook and I write down what day it is and generally how I'm feeling, if there's anything significant. And I've been able to flick back and go, oh, this happened last month at this time. All right, that's normal, that's fine.
Yeah.
And that has been quite helpful.
There's huge liberation in that, because often, and that was, I guess, what interested me initially in a lot of this work and helping to kind of explore and understand it a little bit more, was that I would often have women, talking to me about anxiety, depression, kind of what we would, categorize as mental health. And somewhere in there, the light bulb moment came for me. Is this a mental health problem or a menstrual health problem?
Yeah.
And I think that has been so transformative in my own thinking for my own health, and also in the work that I do with clients as well. And I think that's something that's really, really important for us as women to know and to understand, that what we see as a mental ill health issue or a mental health problem, in terms of anxiety or depression or low mood or anger even, or, a lot of those emotions, can very often be menstrual cycle related. And by being aware of that, it can sometimes take away its power. I remember once speaking to a lady, and she, I was kind of saying, is there any pattern to this? And she was very disconnected from her cycle. She had a very busy life, and life was just happening. And I said, is there a pattern to it? And she was like, no, definitely not. I don't know why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, whatever. And so I was working with her for quite a while, and she'd have regular enough appointments. And I noticed after a couple of months, that she would always message me at the same time of each month saying, do you have any appointments this week? Kind of emergency short notice appointments. And we were able to trace it back and say, but look, that's the same moon phase. That's the same phase of your menstrual cycle. And so when she understood that, it was almost easier to let it go, because I think one of the challenges, and having went through a difficult emotional time myself, one of the challenges is we don't understand why we're feeling the way we're feeling, and we don't understand where it has just come out of. Yesterday I was fine, and today now, I'm struggling with X, Y, or Z. And it's that kind of cyclical nature that will be heightened by hormones at a particular time. So it's almost easy to say, well, I find it easy when I can go, oh, that's just because there's a full moon, or that's just because I'm premenstrual, or that's just, and when I can give it a reason, then
it takes
I'm much
away the power of it.
Yeah, I can sort of flow with it a little bit easier and go, oh, well, actually it'll pass. And next week I'll be, in a couple of days, I'll be feeling that differently.
Yeah, definitely. And it takes away the power once you can acknowledge what it is. Because I remember even before I was aware of the cycle and everything, as soon as I did know what it was, I was like, okay, that's fine. I'm not nuts. This is just happening. I saw something. It was something like when people complain, or men say, well, I think it was the thing was saying men say that women are giving out to them on their period, so then they're obviously crazy on their period, but actually the thing they're giving out to them about is something that annoys them all the time, but they just can't cope with dealing with it when they're going through this as well.
Yeah, it's that idea that we would use with women, and we would say, this is not something that needs to be just ignored because you think you're crazy and you're on your period. It actually really needs to be explored and heard and listened to, because it's coming to the surface at that time in order to be released and let go of. And there would be some chain of thought that if we suppress those emotions each month, rather than releasing them in the way that perhaps we were, designed, that leads into more challenging menopause and all of those things. So rather than having a little release of built up emotions, we actually, in a healthy, productive way, we kind of dismiss them and say, oh, it's just because, or other people around us dismiss them, rather than saying, no, this is when you're actually authentically in your truth and you're actually expressing what you really feel, that at other times of the month, perhaps you kind of just have dismissed it and let it go.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things about having a cycle is that depending on when it falls around the moon, I either get one or two different times to release things, because with the full moon, it's about lighting up whatever is coming up that you need to release. And then you're literally releasing during your period or while you're bleeding. And it's kind of a reminder in a way that I can go, I can release something else now, where it's, and I think that's because in Lisa Lister's book, she talks about how she had really difficult periods, and now she really enjoys and is looking forward to when she's going to have a period. And in the book, she's kind of like, okay, before you put down the book and think I'm completely crazy, just continue to read and you will possibly understand. Totally get it now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally.
And I think the key thing you mentioned there about not having the energy post-bleed, and often that's because we still aren't honoring our bleed in the way that it needs to be, or that time. So,
Yes.
you know, we can't have the burst of energy if we don't allow ourselves to slow
Yes.
down. If we've kept going through it, then our body is not getting those opportunities of changing energies. It's kind of just, it's still, you're noticing it. And, you know, we would talk in the Optimized Woman work around, you know, awareness is kind of first, and then action, it comes with that. So without taking the action, the awareness kind of, you know, we need the action after the awareness.
Yes.
And that can be a journey for women. I mean, I've had women where I've sowed the seeds. You mentioned sowing seeds earlier, where I have kind of, you know, we've talked, and even for myself, like I sowed the seeds around this, and then like it was like 3 years later, I went, oh, okay, now I'm going to take the action. And then, you know, then you move to the next stage where you're planning, and then you know, so it's kind of, you're moving through all the stages. But one of the reasons that we would believe kind of that women's energy is so depleted and that we don't get the peaks afterwards is because actually we haven't honored and slowed down when we needed to. Because if we slow down, then we get a chance to recharge rather than survive, and then we get the energy.
Yeah, well, the society we live in at the minute doesn't exactly encourage us to ever slow down, so it makes perfect sense that we wouldn't. But also when you were saying that you, like 3 years later, you may think, I find that somebody else needs to point it out to me, and then I'm like, of course.
Yeah.
Or I might have been saying it and just not actually heard it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, because this is a time that we are literally told to stop. Because as I mentioned, that I was sick for 2.5 weeks, and I think I'm fairly confident the reason that I got sick was because when the world was stopped, I didn't. I still was. So I wasn't teaching at all, but I was still wanted to do something to support people or to help them. So I decided to put out a whole load of videos, something I'd never done before. And I did a week-long retreat, which was a virtual retreat, but it was lovely, but it was still doing an awful lot. And then I remember the weekend before I got sick, I was chatting to my housemate and I was saying that everybody else is putting their classes online and I felt like I should be doing that, but I didn't really want to. And he said, Katie, just relax. Yeah. Just embrace the fact that you have nothing to do. And then I was sick like the following day. And I spent 2.5 weeks not doing very much because we are literally being told to do that. But the way society was, it was very much like you must keep going and just take medication if you've got pains because of your menstrual cycle. It's just your period. It's fine.
Yeah, that's how it should be.
Yeah,
and it's, you know, one of the things, and I've touched on this in a few of the programs, is that so many of the health symptoms that we experience are common, they're not normal, and there's a huge distinction between what's common and what's normal, inverted commas on the normal there. But I think exactly as you've mentioned there, Katie, that, you know, the world as we know it has been very logical driven. The conversations that I'm having with people, and we're coming close to the end of the show now, and we will come back to this at another date, because I definitely enjoyed the chat, and I hope those that are listening in have as well. Anybody that's listening in, and if you do have any questions, you can contact me after the show, or pop some questions into comments there, and I'll come back to them. But just, you know, that idea that this is perhaps an opportunity for us to fall into a more feminine way of being. Now, once we start touching on feminine and masculine, and I'm going to change that to yin and yang, because you know, feminine and masculine are loaded words, and we are conditioned that one excludes the other, and yet, you know, they're not, and that we have to be a particular gender to have feminine energy, or a particular gender to have masculine energy, and that's absolutely not what we mean when we talk about that. So the yin and the yang energy, if we can move more into a yin kind of energy, which is more feminine and more flowing and more, well, I can do this now because I feel like doing it, rather than the clock is telling me I have to do it.
Yeah.
And you know, and again, so many people that I know have turned to very, and particularly women who may be working in a very you know, high-powered jobs and logical roles and very yang energy-dominated environments. And yet they've, you know, when it has come to this phase, they've dropped back to gardening and baking and all of the very yin kind of energies. And that's, you know, that's been beautiful to I guess, observe in terms of how all of that goes. So Kitty, we are at the end of our show. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank
You're
you
welcome.
for bearing with me with the science stuff earlier. Not quite sure where that went, but I think we got through that. Thank you to those that are listening in. Sharon, thank you. An amazing journey there, Katie. And Attractive, good morning, Joanne and Katie. So Katie, any final words of wisdom to share, or any final thoughts or questions even, or anything just before we go?
I was just thinking that, because I have been quite hard on myself with regards to how productive I am being. So basically, we're not supposed to be productive right now, which is what my housemate was trying to tell me.
Yeah.
So if you don't feel very productive, just let that be okay.
Yeah.
And what
absolutely.
is productive anyway? Like gardening could be very productive.
Yeah, it's a gentle kind of form of production,
Yeah.
isn't it? And survival is incredibly productive, actually. So, you know,
yeah, and breathing, remembering
those,
to do it.
Yeah, we're managing all of those things. So yeah, I think absolutely it's a case of being gentle with ourselves. And I am going to come back and kind of explore with you some of the ideas around what is sickness as well, because that was an interesting kind of touch bit that you touched on there too. And I'm a huge fan of seeing our symptoms as our solution rather than our problem. And if we can change kind of how we see when we're experiencing sickness or disease, then that can also give us power as well to kind of change some of those things. So we'll explore all of that at another time. Thanks a million for your time. Thank you to everybody for watching in. I will be back on Thursday with another incredible friend who will take us into the music world and perhaps the area of Celtic spirituality and all of that as well. And that is Anne Harper is joining me on Thursday. So thanks a million, everybody. Thank you to Destination Uri for hosting, and I look forward to connecting with you through the week. Thanks, Katie.
Thank you.
Bye.